Hi, this is Mike from the Learning Center, and in this mini workshop, we're going to discuss the Myers-Briggs Test, otherwise just called Myers-Briggs, or Myers-Briggs Personality Test, or Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI thus. So for simplicity, I'm just going to call this Myers-Briggs. What is this? This is an inventory that helps kind of measure how you take in the world and what kind of your preferences are therein. It's one of the most popular personality inventories. For a while, it was actually used pre-interview and still is by some companies to kind of figure out what kind of worker you are and kind of how you fit into the wider office culture. It was really kind of clinically developed by C.G. Jung and later improved by Isabel Myers and Catherine Cook Briggs. There are some numbers that date back to 1917. There are some that date to the late 1920s, but roughly somewhere in the 1920s is when this became popular. And it measures what your style is. You can be introverted or extroverted, whether you'd rather go out and do something or whether you'd rather stay home on a free night. Whether you're intuitive or whether you're sensing, whether you base the word based on your observations, or OBS for some personality tests, or whether you're intuitive, like to think between the lines, kind of read between the lines as well. You have thinking or feeling, which is the whole battle between, do you work with your brain or with your heart? Do you take people into account when you do things? You have judging and perceiving. Do you like having a set things to do, or you kind of go with the flow when you kind of schedule things? And all of these put together will get your style. You'll notice that I have some letters capitalized here. Those are the letters that go into your style. If you are an ISFJ, you are introverted, sensing, feeling, and judging. Thus, there are 16 different categories. You put your letters together, you get your type. Why bother doing this? Because people that typically think the same way are around the same kind of person. You'll see a whole bunch of other adjectives that describe certain types. And we all know people that just act completely differently. There are the very, very strict bosses and the very laid back bosses, for example. And they fall into two different categories. There's no right and wrong category, of course. And this is all on a spectrum as well. Perhaps you're not fully introvert or extrovert, you're kind of in the middle. Whereas if you're like me, you're heavily introverted and in the middle on sensing and intuitive. And kind of where you all place will determine the severity or how strong that personality comes out. I've taken this a whole bunch of different times with a whole bunch of different websites. And I get ISTJ, I get INTJ, I get INFP, I get a whole bunch of things. But typically when you use the same site, you'll get the same results, which is kind of the crux of a well-designed Myers-Briggs test. So there's a whole bunch of different places you can do this. There's the official Myers-Briggs test ran by the Myers-Briggs Institute themselves, which you have to be licensed for and all that. And there are a whole bunch of unofficial ones you can find online. My favorite is the 16 personalities because it gives more of a name to these types. For example, INTJ is called the architect because of how ruthless they can be and just very, very perceived to be cold and kind of cunning, very calculated. Whereas ISTJ is called the scientist, and they're known for being thinkers and things like that. And typically what you do is they'll give you a prompt and you rate it based on how much it applies to you. At the end, it'll tally it up and give you your score. So we're going to tell you, with that knowledge, go out and take one and just see where you fall and see kind of what the information, whether you think it kind of falls into your type or not. And that really is the core of a Myers-Briggs test.